Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Koji Imaki, a former pilot and senior leader in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, with many flight hours in both the American-made F-35 and the indigenous F-2 fighter jets. Mr. Imaki has worked for decades in the Japanese self-defense forces, so today we want to discuss his country's military position in the emerging multipolarity. Imaki-san, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a very honor to me.
Very, very glad that you said yes to this, because I've been looking for a military expert in Japan for a while who could also tell us a little bit about the workings of the self-defense forces as a military, the military of Japan. But we maybe need to start explaining in what sense the Japanese military is different from other countries' militaries and why it is called a self-defense force. Can you maybe give us a very short rundown, especially focusing on the differences to, let's say, the US military or European militaries?
It's Pascal, some very interesting and actually deep question to answer. Let me start with the current Japanese national defense strategy, and it's a 5-year defense plan, what they call it a defense build-up plan. There's one element in a 7 pillar of the focused area in the national defense strategy, which is I think that they called it a standoff defense capability, and that used to be discussed in a diet and coalition party, LDP and the Komeito, as the counter-strike capability. Now called it a standoff defense capability. So that sort of a capability is basically the very basic offensive capability for other military services, because you need to have a strike back capability to defend your country. But in Japan's case, that has been position of such a capability has been not necessarily prohibited, but avoided, I would say, for Japanese self-defense forces because of the interpretation of the Japanese constitution. So Japanese constitution does not prohibit to have such a capability, but based on a political judgment, Japanese self-defense forces has been focusing on the purely defense-oriented capabilities, such as air defense capability. And we have been counting such a capability on our allies and partners, such as US forces in Japan. But facing the current quite challenging security circumstances around Japan, such as North Korean missile development, Chinese coercive activities around Japan, to include East China Sea and South China Sea. Japanese government in 2022 decided to have such a capability to defend our country. So they come up with a little bit unusual term as a standoff defense capability, but again, it's de facto the counter-strike capability. So that I think in my mind explains how Japanese self-defense forces are a little bit different from other services in Western country, and how the Japanese self-defense forces has developed its capability in 7 decades of history.
Yeah, we might just need to add, that the Japanese constitution has this famous Article 9, which says that Japan renounces the right to go to war, first of all, and secondly, will not maintain forces to to do such a thing. Hence, Japan has no military, but only self-defense forces, because the constitution recognizes the right to self-defense. And in conjunction with that, the doctrine was that Japan would only maintain capabilities to shoot down any kind of incoming threat, right? But not shoot at a potential target where a threat could emerge from. And that was the change in 2022, right? That Japan for the first time said, if North Korea launches a rocket at us, we will not just shoot down the rocket, we might also shoot at the launch pad in North Korea, right? That's the difference that at least the government explained. And do you also see it like that, or would it be also extendable to other scenarios?
I didn't go into a various detailed scenarios, but I think that scenario is very easy to understand. And actually, that sort of a discussion was not new in Japan, not just pop up in the 2023 timeframe, but almost, I think, almost like 40, 50 years ago, there was a Japanese government statement in cabinet discussion that waiting for an adversary to launch a decisive strike into Japan, and that they call it being dead because of that is not Japanese constitution is asking Japanese nationals to do. So that has not been changed. So the political will has been there that such a capability is within constitutional constraints. But again, based on the political judgment, Japanese government decided not to have such a capability at that point up to the point of 2022. So that's sort of a official policy of Japan.
Right. And, one of the things is that Japan's policy changes in self-defense policy changes are looked at with great suspicion, especially from China and South Korea as well. And they're often interpreted as a potential threat. But I then usually tell people, look, in 2015, Mr. Shinzo Abe changed the interpretation of the constitution as also allowing Japan's self-defense forces to be deployed together with allied forces outside of Japan. But that change actually didn't lead to a militarization of Japan. That change didn't lead to many Japanese forces being deployed abroad. My argument at this point, and I wonder if you agree, is that Japan is still quite constraining itself in terms of where it deploys its forces. Do you also see it like that?
Yes, I think so. So I think what the operation you are referring to was like Japanese forces deployment to Afghanistan, Ukraine, to basically retreat the Japanese nationals in non-safe zones such as Afghanistan or Ukraine back to Japan. So that was the purpose of the deployment. And I think the argument there, even within the Japanese government or with allies and partners, is that the only purpose? I mean, bringing back the Japanese nationals only from a not safe zone to a safe zone, is that really the whole purpose of a Japanese self-defense forces mission, or maybe to include other allies and the partners, nationals, back to the safe zone, if it does make sense to undergo such operation at the same time with retrieval of the Japanese nationals. So those are the areas self-defense forces needs to come up with, I think, in the near future, to not just for the sake of a Japanese national safety, but for more broader safety and prospects of people in our region, I think.
Yeah, but this is where like Japan has been. I mean, the discussion inside Japan has been going on for decades, right? There were Japanese troops deployed in Afghanistan, and famously were at some point needed to be protected inside Afghanistan by coalition forces because under the doctrine, they were not allowed to fire at incoming like enemy fire if that fire wasn't directed at them. If it was directed at the Spanish or the Americans, then the Japanese had to sit tight, right? That was the doctrine, and that was kept up. I mean, even on the battleground, and this has led to a lot of discussions whether that even makes sense and pressure from the United States. Where do we stand today on this kind of, JSDF joint operations with the Japan's allies?
That's Pascal-san, very good and a deep discussion. So the point is, if we are deploying our forces to war zone or basically the peacetime zone, and the Japanese definition of the past deployment was we are dispatching our forces to non-war zone yet. That's why, like you said, the only time we can use the deadly forces was to for the purpose of self-defense. So like you said, if they are shooting at us, then we can protect ourselves by shooting back. But if those enemies are shooting other people, then it's not falls within a category of a self-defense. So a more of a collective defense in basically wartime, and that is the discussion Japanese government needs to dig into to more broad to broaden the self-defense forces mission, and it's quite difficult for current LDP administration, which is minority government. So unlike the Abe era, which was majority of the diet and the cabinet, the current situation is quite different. And now Komeito is exiting the coalition because of those very serious and needed discussion. They, in my perspective, they don't want to be inside of such a discussion because of that will have a conflict with their own policy.
Yeah, and we maybe need to say that the government just changed last week, and we now have a female prime minister, but that female prime minister is still from the same LDP party, the same party as before. But the previous coalition partner, the Komeito, changed now to the Ishin, the Renovation Party, which is more to the right and actually more in alignment with the foreign policy goals of Mrs. Takaichi than the Komeito, which is rather a center pacifist, I would say, force. So in a sense, we now have a more probably more hawkish cabinet, although the defense minister is Mr. Koizumi, who has a rather centrist stance again. I mean, it's very, very diverse actually within Japan. Where would you put the current cabinet, the way that it is formed? If you let's compare it to the previous Abe cabinets, the different stages. Where would you put it more or less?
So, Pascal-san, that's a quite interesting aspect of the Japanese policy making, but I wouldn't call it hawkish, or I wouldn't call it a right administration, because if we get back to our discussion like 10 minutes ago, we have been talking about how Japanese government and the self-defense forces has been doing, and not being able to protect our allies and our partners, and that we are trying to, fix the situation. So are we going to do it right, or are we going to just normalize this situation as the domestic country, right? That's my argument. So if we are going, if one can argue that we are going to the right, but I'm more like we are going back to the center from very different places, which is very selfish in a way. Somebody is protecting us, so we don't have to spend such a large amount of money for our own defense, kind of a mentality to more of a paying a ticket fee, a train fee for the adult instead of a child fee sort of a thing. So that's my argument.
I find that very interesting. It's very good that you brought up two very important things. One, the word normal. It's like this is a long-standing issue for in Japan security thinking. Japan wants to be a normal country, like every other country, especially under the Abe cabinet. And being normal means to scrap the second paragraph of Article 9, saying we will not maintain military forces, so that you don't have to call it anymore self-defense forces, but you can call it the Japanese Army and Navy and so on. That's the one. The other thing is the idea of sorry, what was the second one now? I lost my train of thought. That you said the Japan needs to step up and be reciprocal, right? Because currently the setup is the United States has to defend if Japan is attacked, but Japan doesn't have to defend the United States if it is attacked. The counter argument that actually the last Prime Minister very wittily made, Mr. Ishiba, in an article in the Hudson Institute a month before he became Prime Minister in 2023, was like, he said like, okay, we're willing to do a reciprocal defense agreement, but if that's the case, then since the United States has bases in Japan should have bases in the United States with Japanese jurisdiction, because the deal under the 1960 treaty is land for protection. So if the United States now says we want protection for protection, then you also need to give land for land. How do you see that one developing? I mean, of course, this will never happen, but the original 1960 defense treaty is, of course, land for protection, and the United States is changing the discourse toward this is unfair. I mean, we don't get enough out of it. If you say that it is good that you now do protection for protection, what would be the gain for Japan within that changed framework?
Interesting point. So, Pascal-san, let me introduce a new mission for self-defense forces. It's not quite new anymore, but I think that was almost 10 years old mission, but still sort of new in 7 decades of history of self-defense forces. They call it force protection mission for the allies and the partners. So they have done it for U.S. forces in Japan. For instance, if they are flying a let's say cargo airplane, and that cargo airplane needs to be protected by somebody. U.S. forces in Japan with the fighter forces can protect it, or Japanese forces with the fighter forces can protect it. So why not we are doing it? So that based on such a discussion, we started doing it by giving a legitimacy to such a mission. So in a history over 10 years, we have done many such a force protection mission for U.S. forces airplane, U.S. forces vessels, surface vessels. And I believe we have done it for Australian forces and other partners. So it's still a small scale, but I think it's becoming more reciprocal instead of just being a recipient of the peace. Then the next discussion would be that's the United States, the largest, or probably the strongest military in the world, needs such a protection from a small allies and partners. If it happens to be in this region, if something happens in this region and the U.S. forces deployed to this region has get lots of damages and casualties, that's now a different story. But in the mainland of the U.S., do they really expect such a capability provided from the or by the allies and partners? That's a little bit different discussion, I think.
Right, it is. Now the interesting thing is, of course, that for you or like in your previous work as a member of the self-defense forces, these questions of constitutionality and the theoretical questions always boil down to engagement issues, right? To operational issues, like how do we organize certain even trainings, right? It's less about this abstract kind of protection for land and so on. It's about how do we work together. And I think would you agree with me if I say that the entire defense strategy of Japan, that the way Japan thinks about it, that also the different forces think about it, is built around the US-Japan alliance, right? That's the US-Japan alliance is basically what to Europe is NATO is. It's the core around which, in which Japan understands how it can organize the defense of its archipelago. Is that's still the case, isn't it?
Interesting point. Interesting point. But Pascal-san, I see a substantial difference between like a European defense and Japanese or Asian defense because of a lack of a collective defense mechanism, right? The NATO. Here in Northeast Asia, we do have ASEAN sort of a scheme, but it's nothing to deal with military capability. So in this region, it's pretty much the sets of a bilateral defense agreement or treatments, such as a US-Japan alliance. So lacking such a collective defense mechanism defines a lots of security requirements in this region, which is quite different from a European theater, in my view.
Right, but is there any thinking in Japan or among your colleagues that you know about of Japan having to defend itself alone, as in what do we do if ever the alliance with the Americans just breaks apart?
I think based on such a substantial problem statement, government of Japan is diversing its alliances and partnerships to European countries or Australia. So not solely relying on the two countries agreement, which is still the biggest one, the US-Japan alliance. But that is not the only scheme we can count on, and we play a responsible role. So we are working more with UK, Italy for next fighter development program. They call it GCAP. Australia and Japan is now working together for European next frigate program based on the Japanese Mogami class frigate. So lots of diversification of capability and security agreement is something we are working on instead of relying on a single security agreement.
Right. My experience here is that there's these two schools of thoughts in Japan. One which says we need more indigenous capabilities in order to be a better treaty ally, in order to be also a spear tip, not just a shield in the US-Japan alliance. And the other one that says we need more indigenous capabilities in order to be, in worst case, to go it alone, right? If the Americans pull out, we need to go it alone. But what this leads to is that both of them agree that, well, we need to develop capabilities at home and be able to do things on our own. Is my impression also what you're seeing in the security environment here in Tokyo?
Mm. So, I agree that, having a reliable indigenous capability for weapon system is important. But it's also very costly way of doing it. So, for instance, Japanese systems such as C2 transport aircraft is a much more expensive. I think it's fair to say in that way than the other similar systems in a foreign market. Japanese fighter aircraft is again like a F2 is expensive than the same classes of fighters in the world. So you know the indigenous capability is important, but it doesn't have to be the sole source of defense systems. We can come up with a more joint development such as a GCAP or US Japan ballistic missile defense systems, which is a basically the joint development scheme. So I think going instead of going solely on the indigenous R&D, I think we can go to more joint development based on our own technology.
Right. I mean, certainly Japan can do that, but is this question around like who to also diversify with? Because don't it to me it strikes me that the latest tariffs that Mr. Trump puts on anyone and everyone, isn't that worrying the defense establishment in Tokyo that like, okay, we are being sanctioned and the products we can get or the cooperation that we thought was assured with the United States is not as sure as it seemed to be. Doesn't that raise the question if there are other partners than the United States with whom defense cooperation can be deepened?
Mm, I agree with you, Pascal-san. So that's why we are going to European partners for next fighter program. So uh, you know, in my mind, we are not trying to walk away from the US, but trying to work with more allies and partners, so that we are not risking ourselves over being dependent on a particular partner.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean it's a very tough moment because the United States was and still is the number one partner. I mean, just like purely theoretically, if the United States today said, theoretically, we pull the plug, no more cooperation, zero, would I mean what in order to operate a lot of the systems are actually integrated, right? Japanese systems. A lot of programs wouldn't work anymore, would they, if you had zero cooperation from the United States?
Hmm. I think it's a very true statement. True statement.
So I mean it's the United States is very important for Japan. I think that's something that a lot of people need to understand, just also how the current structure and the networks are created, and what kind of pressures that also creates on Tokyo. But at the same time, I also perceive Japan as somebody who still is engaged very much in dialogue, especially with the Chinese counterparts. I mean, since 2022, we also have a Ministry of Defense to Ministry of Defense hotline where the two tops can actually call each other in case something happens in one of the seas, right? And communicate with each other. How is the self-defense forces dialogue working with the Chinese partners? On what level are they happening at the moment?
So yeah, I think you are seeing the right picture. But that sort of relationship with our neighbors, such as China or even North Korea, which is not quite happening yet, but is critical to not to develop the unintended critical situation with neighbors. So we are, since because of our proximity with China, we are operating in a very close proximity over the, for instance, East China Sea, and we don't want to have any sort of unintended conflict just because of the proximity. So we need to communicate with our counterparts. That is why we are trying to establish, like you said, a communication line, probably at the political level and at the military level as well. So we have been working on that. That is true statement, and which is very different from like a U.S. Japan or a Japan other partners relationship. Trying to build a better understanding and a better I call it risk management scheme with our neighbors. That's the whole intent of our dialogue.
And how is not just the risk management, but the perception management going? I mean, a major issue is like, how does the other one perceive what we are doing and vice versa? Is there any work being done on the Chinese and Japanese militaries to be able to understand how each other's viewpoints inform their their choices?
So I guess what you're asking is not from sort of negative context of managing the relationship, but more of positive or trying to improve the understanding.
Yeah, and just how to tackle the issue that you need to understand the other one. I mean, even whether a friend or an enemy, you always want to understand how the other one sees you. Is that being worked on?
Interesting viewpoint, and very difficult to achieve, I think, Pascal-san, based on the current current situation. For instance, with the other countries, say, I don't know, let's say Australian Air Force, or in our neighbors, like a South Korean forces, we, for instance, exchange our officers to each schools so that we can learn from their operations and even from their perception on us. So that becomes I think a base of our perception on their forces. But if you ask me, if we are doing it such a effort with like a China or North Korea, it's not unfortunately quite there yet. But it's nice to have at the for instance, young officer level to be with them and share basically share our thoughts.
Are there, so there's, I understand you correctly, there is no officer to officer level kind of exchange going on between Japan and the Japanese and the Chinese militaries?
except for the official dialogue, unfortunately, we don't. As far as I know, there's no such a exchange sort of a scheme.
Right. Okay, I'm just asking that because you're absolutely right. You know, within the friendly forces, of course, you exchange and you try to understand how the other partner then views the same strategic challenge. And you know, sometimes, especially within the NATO context, this is then framed as a shared threat perception, so that everybody works with the same framework, which of course is one of the things you need in order to create some form of unity. But we used to have a moment, especially in Europe, where this was also done with the Russians, right? And then you had even Swiss officers who went and studied in Moscow in the military academy, and the same for Germans and French. And you had exchanges so that you could learn from each other. All of that, of course, now broke down, unfortunately. Was there ever a Japanese equivalent, like let's also say together with Russia and with China, and something that broke down, or did it never exist in the first place with, like, let's say Russia and China? I mean, North Korea obviously not, but how about Russia and China?
Are you asking the relationship between Russia and China or Japan and
Japan and Russia, Japan and China. I mean, did the military to military relationship get better, get worse, or just always remain at a kind of mutual, very suspicious level?
Okay. Not necessarily suspicious, but you know, at least not quite moving forward. Even with Russia or China, and that will be not necessarily a military to military relationship, but very much dependent on the political will. And currently, the political relationship between Japan and Russia or Japan and China is not necessarily improving. I would call it status quo. So based on such a political relationship, it is not easy for a military to go forward more with counterpart services.
Right. So that's not something that is happening. But do you think something like this might be something that Japan will be working on in the next couple of years? I mean, just this week or just a few days ago, we heard that the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, she announced that she would want a peace treaty with Russia because formally the two never signed a peace treaty after the Second World War, which is bizarre because actually the Soviet Union has been at war with Japan for the shortest period of time. They only entered on the 9th of August, 45, and Japan, like a month later, I mean, Japan capitulated, in my view, largely because of that. But then there was never a peace treaty, and she said, like, no, we should work toward that now. Do you think this is a sign of the current prime minister saying, like, we need to somehow rekindle this relationship with Russia?
Mm. Yeah, I think we need to hear back from Russian perspective. They are not necessarily leaning forward to improve the relationship with Japan, in my view, partially because of our support to Ukraine. So until the Ukraine situation is solved, even I don't know, the ceasefire or even armistice, it is not easy for Japan as a democratic country to improve with a country who is, in my view, invading another democratic country in Europe. So again, it's a personal view, but it's not easy for us to very much leaning forward to improve the relationship.
Yeah, but the relationship with Ukraine and Russia is an interesting one, isn't it? Because Japan, while giving support, it supported Ukraine with humanitarian assistance. No weapons, no lethal aid. Of course, sanctions on Russia, Japan carried those out too. But my home country of Switzerland is like neutral, and it said under the keeping to its neutral stance, it will not send lethal weapons, but only humanitarian aid, and it also put sanctions. So neutral Switzerland interprets its neutrality as in conformity with exactly the same things that Japan did. So in this sense, Japan lived up to Swiss neutrality in a funny way, which is also why other people say like, no, Switzerland is not neutral anymore because of the sanctions and so on. But it was nevertheless both countries didn't go all the way in, not the way that Germany did or France did or the UK did. So does that somehow impact the way that Japan now also can still the options forward? Because in my view would be that Ms. Takaichi has actually a stronger hand in trying to rebuild a relationship with Russia if that was necessary.
Yeah, I think the last clause you put, if necessary, that I think that's the key. And is there any like a real urgent necessity there, except for the like the in Japanese term, the North four islands closer to Russia. Except for that portion, I mean, need to solve that issue as soon as practical is one pressing issue. But other than that, I don't see much urgency or Japanese will to improve the relationship with Russia beyond the current studies.
How about the oil issue? I mean, Japan is very famously dependent on oil imports, and there is a joint Russian-Japanese drilling project in these Sakhalin Islands up in the north. And I think Mitsubishi and Mitsui both have like big stakes in this, or at least two big conglomerates, and they never sold the stakes. And this should be, I mean, this could have potentially a very beneficial impact for Japan's energy security, which at the moment prices here are going up, right? At the gasoline station.
Right.
Do you think that could be something that might be on the minds of the new cabinet?
It's very hard for me to speak on behalf of the new cabinets, but again, personal view. But Japan is not the only country suffering a rising oil, rising gas price because of the Russian situation with the Ukraine. So that's something in my mind. Something we have to stand instead of compromising our core value of a democracy. So yes, we can keep the economy going on with Russia as much as or as far as we can preserve our position on the democratic value. But that is something we cannot undermine,
right,
for the economical benefits with Russia.
Right. Now, something that's currently going on and that worries me a lot is that we have a huge Navy buildup of the U.S. Navy in front of Venezuela. And the talk is that, there's already a 50 million bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro. And the U.S. has already said, we want him dead or alive. And we want a new government. And they have now called the fort, the carrier group fort from the Middle East or from Europe, where it was, to the Caribbean. Do you think if it becomes a reality that there will be a U.S.-Venezuelan war and U.S. will attack Venezuela and start occupying these oil fields and so on, how do you think would such a scenario impact Japan's security assessment for the Pacific?
I'm sure that there is some number of Japanese nationals in Venezuela, based on basically the economical reasons. So that will be another possible mission for Japan self-defense forces to deploy our force to retreat our nationals, and hopefully with the other
rescue them from the U.S. strikes. Yeah,
correct.
But wouldn't that be quite an psychologically quite hard for Japan to say, like, okay, the United States is invading Venezuela? I mean, how would you react as a Japanese citizen if that became the case? Because at the moment it's very threatening. It's extremely threatening in the Caribbean.
So putting aside the reasoning for the US to use their armed forces against Venezuela, I'm sure that they have certain reasons based on their values and based on their values. So I am not going to argue with the US counterparts to judge if that value is right or wrong, but just purely based on the situation developing and threatening the safety of Japanese and other allies and partners people, then we're gonna have to use our own capability to keep them safe. That is the only value of mine.
Right. So I mean, in this sense, that Japan cares to implement its security policy, which is to make sure that Japanese nationals are safe and bring them back. Never mind, like, whether it's Russia in Ukraine or the United States in Venezuela, Japan's forces will implement their mandate as given also through the constitution. Is that's would be the right way of framing it, you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. That's yeah. I mean, it's quite one of the things that I believe that people abroad don't understand or sometimes misunderstand is that Japan is actually extremely careful to abide by its constitutional framework. Very, very careful. I mean, the discussions that are ongoing and also what this then means for operational details is very high, isn't it? I mean, when you were an active service in an active duty service, did it happen often that you were also forced to contemplate on the the constitutional setup, what it means for what your forces and your team could do and couldn't do?
I think my answer is yes. We are very much conscious or even cautious not to go beyond the constitutional limits. But Pascal-san, I don't think it's just a issue or a situation of Japan alone, but any democratic country has first there's a constitutional constraints the military itself can do or cannot do, and we are also under the civilian control over basically the government or people of that country. In my case, people of Japan. So based on the Japanese people's or nationals' will, which is expressed by the civilian control, we have to be within the limits.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But the issue is that some countries live up to that promise. So I think Japan is one, and other countries, have a track record of maybe, just closing both eyes sometimes, because in the U.S. Constitution says the U.S. military cannot be used internally, but now we see the forces being deployed into the cities. It also says, well, you cannot do extrajudicial killings of civilians, but we see the U.S. military actually now sinking civilian boats in the Caribbean, 10 of them already, killing more than 40 civilians, just reclassifying them as like narco terrorists, therefore narco militants, which is a very, I mean, this will not stand in front of any kind of court of law, but by the time that happens, these people are long dead. So, but the case of Japan, my argument would be that we have a long track record of actually, you know, Japan trying to to clearly understand its own given rules and then trying to live up to them, which is then also a source of frustration when the United States says, hey guys, you got to do more for us. Hey, you got to do more. And, I mean, you must have come across such moments when the Americans tried to push you to do something where you had to say like, wait a minute, need to talk this through first.
Yes, so I just have to say that we have been in that way, and in my personal view, we want to be in that way in the future as well, because again, you know, constitutional constraints, that's you know, constitution is just a written, you know, sentences, right. So somebody has to, you know, interpret it to actually implement something, and that sort of a practices is the civilian control in my mind. So if we were ordered in that way to develop with a certain limits, then we are very much obligated to do so.
Right. Maybe toward the end, I would like to know to understand a little bit how you are seeing now Japan's security discourse developing. It's what do you foresee are the issues that Japan will be trying to tackle internally and with its allies in the next 5 years? Or how will the discourse be framed, especially within the country?
Within the country. So I think the next biggest discussion is how much capability we need to fulfill the you know, Japanese people's expectation in country, right? That's I'm trying not to focus on other partners, but in country, and is the 2% of a GDP enough to possess or build such a capability? That is the biggest question in my mind. And in a previous discussion, I used the ticket fare for children. That's what I was referring to, is 1% of our GDP. Very much, you know, internal restriction on the defense spending. That was the 1%. But you know, by looking at the world standard now, NATO is used to be at 2% as a goal, but now looking for 5%. Japan is still short of 2%, even after spending a higher defense expenditures. So should we go beyond the 2%, like NATO is trying to do in next 5 to 10 years? That's the question Japanese people needs to decide inside our own country. And my personal view is, yes, we need to go beyond that to possess the required capability to defend our own country.
But may I ask you, like, the 2%, 1%, 2%, 5% never made sense to me, because I always thought defending your country means that you need an assessment of what is needed in order to defend. And then once you know what you need, you figure out how much it costs. And then you try to find the money for that. But with a 2%, 5% discussion, we do the opposite, right? We basically create a budget. We say like, okay, we want the budget to be this big or this big, and now go and find places where we could need those money. I mean, you as a military man, would you rather have a threat assessment based budget, or a just lump sum money and then go and spend it on whatever you like? Which do you actually prefer, the 5%, like the percent approach?
So we call it, either a threat based planning or capability based planning. And Japan has been more of a capability based planning. What is the sort of a balanced capability of a Japanese defense forces?
What can we do? What do we have?
Right. And I think we continue in that way because it's very difficult to figure out how much is needed to counter the, hypothetical threat. But if you, look at the situation in Ukraine, if deterrence fails for whatever the reason is, then you are spending almost like a 50% of your GDP for defense now.
Yes, you do. But on the other hand, aren't you afraid that if you create capabilities, it might create the urge to maybe try to use them? I mean, since there is now all of these capabilities, usually then these institutions, once you give the money and a budget, they don't suddenly say like, it's good now, we're fine, we're big enough. Usually they find reasons to say like, we need more and more and more and more. And then, this is one of the things that I think from what I've hear from Chinese colleagues that worries them, Japan back in the days, they had given like the Kwantung leased area, and then from there, because the capability was there, suddenly it started growing and go out. Isn't there a danger that Japan might create a new militarism unintentionally, but that it might grow by actually just slapping a lot of money on it?
Okay, Pascal-san, I have a very simple answer to your agenda or question. No, we are not going in that way because we are living under the constitutional constraints, which is implemented by the civilian control as the democratic country. So I wouldn't say that there's no such a possibility or somebody thinks in that way. But as a whole country, I am very much a believer of civilian control and democratic value, unlike our counterparts in the defined social systems.
Right. And this is also important, like since Japan is not in a multilateral alliance like NATO, there's no money that will go to third parties, right? All of the money will be spent by the Japanese Ministry of Defense on programs decided maybe in conjunction with others, but it will be under the civilian control, not under a supranational control or something, right?
Right.
Okay, that's a very important difference, actually. Is there any last thing that you think is important to understand about Japan's current defense situation, or did we more or less cover it?
Pretty much we covered, and Pascal-san, sorry, I'm running out of my time.
Thank you. People who want to read from you, is there a place to go to read from you?
Read from me.
Like, if you have a blog where you post things, or is there a good place where people can follow you if they want to read more from your work?
Okay, I think the LinkedIn would be the good one.
Okay. I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the description of this video. Imaki-san, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Pascal-san. Very nice to speak with you. Bye now.